Hello everyone, we are Geeks Not Nerds. I'm Captain Logan. Hi Vince! Today's question comes from Red Gohan 147, who has a somewhat lengthy question because he has an example in his question, and so let's hear what he has to say. He says, "Hello, Captain Logan." He doesn't say Vince, so you don't have to be here. Yeah, so I guess I'll tackle this one myself. He says before, no, come on back, Vince. We can always use some. Come back, Vince. He says, "Hello, Captain Logan. Before I get to my main point, I just want to say I love your videos. Keep up the good work." Anyway, I bring this question in response to people's reaction to Man of Steel's ending, in which Superman kills Zod. What? Spoiler warning. Now, Superman is the most iconic... So if you're waiting for video, we apologize. Superman is the most iconic superhero ever, and the mass has a preconception of what he needs to be, and that doesn't include killing. Now, with that said, it seems people are on the fence towards seeing iconic characters change too much. This limits the stories that can be told with a character if people won't accept a new direction or element. So, with that said, do you think a character being too iconic is a liability? With the example, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, was it out of character for Superman to kill that character? And that's really the million-dollar question when it comes to Man of Steel.
Which, with Man of Steel, I don't think they necessarily changed the character. Now, I have a professor and friend, or former professor and friend, who says that essentially by doing what they did with Superman, they've made a movie about a person who is not Superman. Which, to some extent, I understand where he's coming from, and it's a fair argument. But I
argued with him about it myself, yeah.
I don't think it's not about Superman. I just don't think they give, and we've said this in videos before, I don't think they gave the right emphasis on things, because essentially you can make a movie in which Superman kills a person and it's still Superman. The point is, does Superman know that what he did was his only resort and will work doubly hard in the future to find another one?
Yeah, and as I've said in the past, the difficulty there was just, were we enough in that character's head? And I don't think that we were. Exactly. As much as I liked that movie, and as okay as I was with that as a choice in the narrative, were his... It's not even that his reasonings weren't made explicit enough so much as what his actual mindset is, what his worldview is. We get some of that, and I appreciate not being completely spoon-fed things, but Superman is a character where I think it is always okay to come out and say, I believe in this thing, and this other thing.
Can we say... I
said that on a live show the other day, but I still feel that way about it.
I'm not convinced of this statement.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we say that maybe the problem with Man of Steel is that we have a decent character arc, but not enough character progression to make the arc believable?
I think it's more... I think you might be right. For me, the more I'm thinking about it, I'm starting to think that it's more a matter of what the action is doing on screen isn't matching up with what the movie is trying to say, given all the collateral damage, which again was not a problem for me when I first saw it, but I'm getting why it's bothering people, because it's like, well, Superman must have known that all of these people were dying in these fights he was having, but then he gets to the end, and the reason he kills Zod is to keep these people from dying, so it might be that the story was fine on the page, but that the problem was in the directing.
Yeah, it might have just gotten too big for its britches, Britches being so important for movies.
If you wrote this as a novel, maybe it would work in a way that it didn't as well on screen, because what's being filmed isn't necessarily meshing with what the story is. Now, what I always thought, though, after I started hearing people, the big backlash from a lot of fans about Superman killing, is that maybe the problem is more that people just don't want to see Superman have to deal with that scenario. That, if you put Superman in that no-win scenario, we're not going to like his choice either way, because what kind of movie would it have been if he sat there and he allowed those people to die? How would we have felt about that?
Yeah.
Would that not have been worse, or would it have been the same thing for people? What would it have been? So the thing is, the reason that my point is you gotta be savvy enough to think about this from a script writing level, from a writer's perspective. The reason that Superman in so many stories, now it's not that Superman's never killed before. I know somebody's going to think about that right there in the comics. Well, Captain Logan, Superman has killed in the comics. Yeah, no, I know that. But this guy is talking about the masses that don't read comic books, that are used to Christopher Reeve. Yeah, there's a reason people think that Superman never kills, and so you can't just say, well, it's okay for Superman to kill because he's done it in the comics. It has to work with this one. And the thing is, from a writer's perspective, the reason Superman doesn't ever have to kill and his philosophy works is because the writers decide that it works. You see what I'm saying? That you're making an optimistic story about how you don't have to kill people. And this is a story in which there was no other option.
Yeah, this movie...
Or where at least they wanted us to think that there was no other option. I don't want to get in that argument, but...
I think people tend to look at characters like Superman, characters like Captain America, and they say, nobody's going to die because they're good enough that they can figure out a solution. Well... trouble is there are some situations that are no-win. It's a fact of life.
We just haven't on screen very often put Superman in that position.
So I really think that this is more like Superman 2 material, not necessarily in the history of Superman, what we traditionally call Superman 2. But I feel like Man of Steel should have been the sequel to the first Man of Steel movie, because
you're saying don't put him there in his first movie.
Yeah, I feel like you need to really solidify who the guy is, and I feel like they could have done that in this movie. But if they wanted to make the movie that they just made, they should have made that the sequel. I mean, these things cannot coexist. You cannot have people say, I know exactly where this character is without showing us that.
I'm agreeing that in Man of Steel it was not wholly effective. I didn't mind the choice. I like the scene. I agree with everybody that says that we needed more breathing room after that. I get all of that. I get why people don't think it's effective. Is it because, but to answer this question, is it because the character is too iconic, or is it because the writing and the directing together were not effective enough? I don't think it's because he's too iconic. I really think that you can get away with Superman killing someone, but you have to get away with it. It's just like anything. Now, I also understand why people don't want to see that, and in that case, it becomes a taste thing.
I think that's where the iconic thing comes in. I think, essentially, as you said, you can make anything work, you just have to make it work. And that's not to say that the writer's hands or the mechanic that the writer has put in there should be obvious.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. That's how you make it work, is you make it not obvious that somebody's pulling the strings. But
yeah, that's exactly right.
The iconic part comes in when you look at the audience, and the audience says, they didn't do it well enough. They picked up on that and said, that is not right. That's not Superman. Well, you were angry because you have this idea in your head of what Superman's supposed to be, and they did not achieve making you believe that this is Superman.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
I think that there is a core character that you need to stay true to a certain extent.
But and what I was going to ask you, Vince, is the question is, how do you determine those traits? Is it because it has, and I've said this in the past, it has very often been a core trait for both Batman and Superman that these are characters that do not cross that line. But again, I feel like very often we find ways to just put them in a place where they don't have to cross that line, and so then we're conveniently able to keep making that a trait of them. I feel like that part of the issue is people articulating things. Is the issue really that Superman killed, or was it that the movie just didn't make you believe that he would?
I think that's what it is, and I think the outrage that people have is the iconic thing. They have this idea in their mind, but I don't think the movie convinced those people. I think it could have,
and I like to think that it could have. That's my point. I think it could have convinced, especially if in the same movie you have a Superman that at the end says never again. Right. I really feel like if the line "never again" had been there toward the end somehow, that people would be that would have diffused some of this. But people still wouldn't have. There still would have been people that didn't like it. So how do we figure out what the line is, Vince? I think that what makes some of these characters iconic, or rather, because different things make different characters iconic. But what it is that makes somebody like Superman or Batman, like what their core traits are, what their values are, what they should never break and never change, is not what they were at their inception, because after all, Batman had a gun when he first started, and Superman was a lot more of a crusader than he becomes later, and a little bit closer to a vigilante, although not anything like Batman. Again, kind of at his first appearance, he quickly turned into something else. But my point is, I think that what makes these characters iconic is what they turn into over time after a whole lot of people have gotten their hands on them. Yeah. And there are certain versions that permeate and become the thing that people really, really latch onto. So, ergo, these things are products of their time. The reason that the iconography business becomes an issue is because the reason that the iconic nature of these characters become an issue is because we are changing them to become what we think we need them to be in our time. And so Superman in this movie has a lot more internal conflict. He's got a lot more inner strife. He's got
that we're not privy to.
He's but you know why some of it's there. But he is certainly angstier than any Superman we've ever seen before.
That's an interesting statement considering Smallville. But
I don't consider that Superman.
Fair enough.
Well, until the end. I'm just saying he never calls himself Superman for 10 years. But
teen angst and inner turmoil are two different things.
Well, my assumption is by the time he puts on the costume, he's not angsty anymore. We just, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
we don't
watched
really see
the
it
growth
after that,
to that point.
Yeah, exactly. But I just mean that for a guy in the suit, I'm not trying to Smallville bash. The guy, just because it's not warranted right at this very minute. But the guy wearing the Superman costume, this one is the most kind of inner tortured version I think we've seen. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean most of the time. Well, I'll say this: I think people tend to want to see a Superman who is self-assured, a Superman who is very stand-up, chest-up, proud.
Yeah, because we want to live up to him.
And they look at that and they say, truth, justice, and the American way. Well, he has his ideals and he knows what he wants. Well, I think it's an interesting statement, and I'm not saying that this really doesn't answer his question at all, but I think it's an interesting statement that truth, justice, and the American way. Well, we do have capital punishment. So...
oh, that's interesting. But not in every state.
Well, no, but I do think that's interesting. It is part of the American way. It is part of the American justice system. And to have Superman not be able to support part of the justice system is, kind of an idealized version of what America should be. Now, maybe that's what it is. Maybe people look at that and say, America's better than this. Well, we're not. That's just a fact. That America's not better than that.
Yeah. Well, and it just depends on what kind of ideals, he's gonna have. Yeah. It's a tough call.
So, I mean, I also tend to think that, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to come down and say political, but I'm saying, or I'm not trying to show you any of my politics, I'm just saying I do think that there are scenarios in which it's one evil versus another. And I think this movie set up the scenario and then didn't give you how awful that makes the person who has to make the choice feel.
Here's what happened. This movie is really experimental with Superman because it is trying really hard. I gotta give it credit for this. It is trying really hard to break past the mold that ironically is what people wish it had stayed in, but has kept Superman away from the intense popularity he used to have. And that is the age-old argument that a lot of, especially fanboys that like comic books but don't like Superman, say Superman's not relatable. He's too powerful. He can do no wrong. He's not relatable. The movie tried to make him relatable, and half the people that saw it didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is it's hard to please everyone who wants that, traditional white hat versus black hat movie, and then make a movie where a character actually has some conflict. I mean,
but also keep in mind that this is an origin of Superman movie, so he can grow into that. Now, we haven't seen that yet. This is one of those things where I feel like all bets are going to be off, once we see where they go with it next time.
Now, let's talk a minute about, just so we can, because the question's not just about Superman.
No, right, yeah.
let's take a minute and just look at some other characters for a minute. Like, people tend to... We've had somebody ask about Spider-Man being iconic. And, that's the thing, is I think that Spider-Man's not that greatly iconic. I think that Spider-Man is well known.
He's popular, yeah.
I think Spider-Man, people tend to think is really interesting, but you can effectively do anything you want with him. He doesn't have to be a teenager every time.
Yeah, that's right.
He doesn't have to be,
No, he's not a static character like Batman and Superman often are, where they're unchanging, but the traits that they have is what we like about them, and so we want to see them have those. Whereas Spider-Man was meant to be an evolving character.
Yeah, and it's hard to hammer him down at any given point in his
That's true of most of Marvel. I mean, that's just the difference between the two companies. Or at least it used to be. DC is more lately tried to do something closer to Marvel, but yeah. But I mean, I'm just saying that's what they were at their inceptions.
So let's see here, Batman Returns, even the Penguin and Catwoman. Nothing like we'd seen before, at least not that I was aware of.
Yeah.
And some people still accepted it. Some people rebelled against it. We have some people that's their concept of what the Penguin is that Danny DeVito Penguin, and of course the Batman kind of echoes that.
Yeah, sure.
So there are people out there that's what they grew up with. That's how they know the Penguin, as opposed to the mock sophisticate that we get in things like Batman the Animated Series and Batman comics.
Or sometimes kind of an actual sophisticate, depending on who's writing him. But yeah,
good point. I've always kind of liked the big muckety-muck Penguin, who's not just this faux sophisticate, but more a guy who does enjoy the finer things and is capable of understanding and relating to someone who is versed in the finer things.
But don't you think that part of what happens here is that these are products of the time that they were either invented in, where they came out of, or they became a product of their time at the point that they got most popular. And so what becomes difficult about this is that we want them to stay what they were when they were more of a Cold War allegory, or when they were more of a World War II allegory, or those sorts of things where the ideals and the issues of the time have... maybe very often they are still things that are worth talking about and things that are issues now in our modern culture, but then we have other kinds of problems and things that we want to use those iconic characters to talk about because they are already so popular.
Maybe what we have right here is a generational issue even.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Like, maybe it's just people like, this is the way I'm used to seeing the Lone Ranger. I don't want to see the Lone Ranger shoot people dead. I just want to see him shoot the guns out of hands. And then people in this age, this more cynical age, looks at that and says, well, first of all, that doesn't make any sense.
They want realism, yeah.
If he did that, he'd be blowing their hands off anyway. So why don't we just have him shoot people? And, fair enough. I don't mind it. I mean, in my mind, it's kind of an evolution of the character. And it's okay to change things because, it's a potential that it's going to go back to the way it was.
Yeah, sure.
So there's a potential that we'll get a Superman movie where Superman is the truth, justice, and American way, no kill ever guy.
Yeah, these characters are going to be the products of the time that you live in to a certain degree. And when they're not, they're throwbacks or they're homages or they're parodies, right?
I think you could almost argue that, give me a second here. I think you could almost argue that it's a liability to deviate from the icon, that it's also a liability to adhere to the icon.
Well, it was with Superman for a good long time.
Because people
say... were accepting it.
Exactly as you said earlier, people say, well, Superman's too powerful, he's not relatable, there's no weakness other than kryptonite or magic, and that's not interesting.
No one with that much power could possibly be that altruistic, so we don't buy it because it seems like we're just telling stories to feel better about ourselves in a world that is not this good. And then other people say, well, we're trying to make the world a better place by showing people what it could be, and that's always the argument.
And and another argument is what's wrong with escapist fiction? Why not show an idealized world?
Yeah, exactly. Sure. That's storytelling, man. As long as you can create a suspension of disbelief by making me buy that this is how the world is, I don't need a world that looks like this world or that looks like an exaggerated satire of this world. Not everything that is stylized has to be Sin City. You can be stylized and go the other way.
You know, I find it interesting watching what my wife likes to watch, and I mean, it's interesting how that's there's a lot of stuff that's just these major movies that she doesn't care for because of where the culture's going, and essentially
I can sympathize with her. Yeah,
we as people in the modern age apparently like movies about people who are hard to redeem.
Yeah, that's right.
And not necessarily non-redeemable because they ultimately redeem themselves by the end of the movie, but you spend the whole movie like say Crazy Heart, which I never actually got a chance to see, but apparently. But you have like District 9, where you follow a despicable person who learns to not be despicable.
Sure. Yeah.
We follow a person who is hard to like, or a person who's rough around the edges, which is okay. Like the Wolverine, a guy who's rough around the edges. But
we are big into anti-heroes, and we have been for a long time. I mean, you know,
this is not something that's new, but it's something that's prevalent right now.
But I think that it is evolved into becoming the norm. You know, it used to be your like if you go to the 80s, that I want to say is when anti-heroes became the biggest deal. When things got a lot more about pushing the envelope of the kind of cynical fiction you can make and still care about a character.
If I may add an addendum, the 80s also being a big time for camp, a lot of that was presented as ridiculous, which now we're accepting as realistic.
Yeah, that's true.
So,
but what I was going to say is, it still wasn't the mainstream. It was mainstream, but it wasn't. There was more of other stuff than there was of that. You know, it seemed harder and edgier, and what we have now is a whole lot of hard and edgy, and not near as much, at least from what I've been consuming, grounded and straightforward. You know, and like I'm not even making a judgment call either way about that. I'm just saying that's kind of where we're at right now.
A trend that we've noticed.
Yeah, and so it makes sense, as much as I'd like there to be more of a variety for a lot of reasons, that superhero movies have, by and large, gone more in that direction, where, not that they're all just, you know, we hate these superheroes, but you know, but like, where they're not all the can do no wrong altruistic people that we had that we had when you and I were kids. And I think that, you know, Marvel has been trying really hard to bring some of that back a little bit, and I think some people don't like that, and I think that also they haven't, but I don't think they've gone too far either, because, you know, there's plenty of stuff in the Iron Man films, for instance, where he doesn't, you know, he's not a can do no wrong kind of hero. He's a guy trying to do the right thing. And I think that, you know, that's, if you're going to do a relatable, human, realistic superhero, that's the way you do that. Yeah. So the issue with Superman is just people, there are a lot of people who didn't want that.
Yeah. I almost think that these cultural trends, particularly in fiction, is almost like driving on ice, because they kind of steer into it. They overcompensate.
Yeah,
and that's not to say they've gone overboard or they've gone too far, but I feel like they're like, well, people like this, and then a million things just like it, or at least echoing that, come out, and so it just floods. So suddenly
that ain't new either.
No. So suddenly everything's about superheroes. Now suddenly everything's about dark superheroes. Now suddenly everything's about anti-heroes, super or not. Now suddenly everything's. And then, like in comic books, right now we're seeing this interesting kind of backlash, which maybe that's not the right word to use, but we super far just a year or two ago into the dark realm, and now we started to come back out of it because people are like, well, you know, I kind of want to see my lighthearted heroic superheroes. So then we start getting a little more of that. So there's this kind of boomerang.
You're talking about a pendulum swing, yeah, and that's going to keep happening. So it'll be interesting to see if people get sick of seeing things that just keep trying to push the envelope of dark, where you're like, well, we've got about as far rough around the edges as we can, to the point where there are no edges. Which, you know,
I mean, these things do not happen in a vacuum, so it's not like everything just goes one way and then it sticks there for a while, because we do have these flecks over here that you get these lighthearted movies that get made, and you get so you do get things that escape through the veil, but I mean, you do tend to see one more than the other. Regardless, I mean, you do tend to see one more of one thing, whatever's hot at the time.
And so when I say I'd like to see more variety, that's kind of wishful thinking. You know, if you go back to the 90s, you saw a lot more...
The whole ironic thing that they did.
Yeah, and also, but you still at the time had more kind of family-friendly stuff than you had our stuff. And then, well, you still had plenty of R, but like even the R stuff wasn't as hard as it often is now, right? And then you get to now, and it's kind of backwards, kind of the other way. Well, you know why that is? It's because culturally we've gotten more into a trend where, especially with like the way the economy is and stuff, where the people with the money are not the people with kids these days very often, you know. And so obviously our culture is going to be kind of pushing. Or is going to be kind of gearing their products to the people that are spending the money, you know, and so a lot of the people with disposable incomes right now are kind of single men and women in their mid to late 20s without kids. You know, you always used to talk about how so many films were made for teenagers. I feel like that's flipping now. I don't think we've got so much stuff coming out for teens anymore, so much as stuff coming out for the like 20-something single people going out to the movie theater. I certainly see a lot more of that now, and so those people want stuff that's more adult. So that's what's being made now, which makes perfect sense. So I'd love to see more variety, but I also can't expect that right now.
This is almost jumping off on another topic, but I think kids are getting to the point that they're viewing things that are really inappropriate for their age, and they're getting old before their time, and it's not necessarily that they're maturing fast, but rather that they are accepting more adult pieces of fiction and just adopting more adult pieces like sex and drugs and rock and roll. Ignore the rock and roll part. I was being silly, but
unfortunately, I wish that was as popular as it used to be too.
These more adult things start becoming a natural part of younger and younger people's lives. Yeah. And first of all, that's kind of scary. And
I think so too. Not everybody agrees with this, but I think
secondly,
so too.
I'm not convinced that the big muckety-mucks with the money are not marketing to those people, but rather that now they have this broader margin of people to which they are marketing. Someone who they can appeal to the libido a little bit more.
And so just to bring this around, it's gonna change your icons, but these characters have been evolving forever.
And I would almost say that because it's iconic, it means that we can't really swing too far away from something without coming back to that midline of the icon.
I really think you're right. I think that again, going back to Man of Steel, I think that the critical divide on that movie tells you that. Because there are plenty of people that are not accepting it. And that means that version, no matter how much money it makes, is probably not going to go down in history as the definitive version of Superman. I really don't think that it will.
Yeah. Like, let's say they never get the definitive version of Superman, but here it is. So this finger is the definitive version of Superman, right?
What?
And now we have over here and over here where these movies are going to be made. So it swings over here and they go, that's not Superman, that's not true to the character. And then it swings past it again, they go, that's too boring. And then it swings back over and that's not Superman.
Can I see your definitive version of Superman again? Good, he's got the S on the cape. That's good.
That's right. It's on this side. You guys can't see it.
But he's got to have the S on the cape.
Yeah, the S is really small, so this is really the Superman Returns version of... Anyway. That's not definitive! I'm kidding.
Oh, it is on the belt buckle!
This is ridiculous! What, does he have Superman shark repellent too? I don't know. I just had some people go, ha-ha! I had some people go, oh...
So I think that the answer to the question is kind of yes. I think that how iconic a character is can be problematic for the critical or commercial success of the thing going on. But collectively as a culture, we're gonna kind of. I mean, unless we're just fully, completely divided, it seems like at least historically we've tended to have kind of a bit of a consensus of the kind of traits we want in a character, or better yet, even, we can accept some slightly different versions of those characters. I mean, I've always said this, there is such a huge range of different kinds of ways you can do Batman.
Yeah.
And I like to think the same is kind of true of Superman, but I don't think that it is as wide.
Yeah.
Or at least I don't think that it has historically been as wide. Let me ask you this, just for your... I'm going to throw out a couple characters, and I'd like to know to you what, like, the main traits are that these characters possess. Like, if they were to change, what would they have to change? What would be the one or two big things they'd have to change for characters that we like, that we consume, for them not to be that character anymore? The Punisher. Now, I'm not calling the Punisher iconic. I'm just talking about characters that have been around a long time, that have always kind of been, more or less the same thing. Maybe. Anyway, what would they have to change for the Punisher for him not to be the Punisher anymore?
Well, the Punisher is a character that's... you would have to take away the fact that he kills people. I mean, that's his thing. That's what he does. He punishes via murdering. And if you take that away, he's no longer the Punisher. Although in comic books, because you can't just have the Punisher running around with Spider-Man shooting everyone, because Spider-Man wouldn't let that fly. So you get these really stilted lines of dialogue. Well, since I'm with you, I'll use these rubber bullets that I apparently keep with me at all times and have an excess of. What? And at some point you go, that's just silly. And you go, I can accept it because they did give me a reason for it.
Yeah.
So he's still technically the Punisher, but
that's not what you want.
It's not. It doesn't ring true to the character. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Otherwise, why not just say, "I'm not gonna hang out with you, Spider-Man"?
What would they have to do to the Shadow where he's not the Shadow anymore?
Oh man, the Shadow. You're just picking my fandom.
Yes. That's why I'm doing this.
The Shadow, I would say the Shadow would no longer be the Shadow. Well, I've accepted varying different versions of the Shadow.
Okay.
He's a different creature between the radio show, between the pulp novels, between the movie, between the comic books. It becomes a different thing depending on the medium that you're in.
Yeah.
And sometimes even within the mediums, depending on which person's writing them. So the Shadow, you would have to take away his power. And personally, I've even seen some... Personally, as if other people haven't read this as well. I've even seen some things where they've altered his powers to accept other things. Like, it's not just clouding men's minds to where they cannot see him, but he can also read men's minds. He can also control men's minds to a certain degree. So, I think the Shadow is a character that's really fluid, and people would accept it if he didn't kill anyone, and people would accept it if he did kill people. I think people would accept it if, as long as he was able to use his powers, people will accept it.
One thing I always like to remind folks when something comes out and it's a new version of a character that they love and they feel like the character has been ruined is that the stuff that you love doesn't go away.
Yeah, Star Trek still exists.
Yeah,
despite what's come out recently.
Yeah, so it didn't ruin, and I also don't hate those films, and Sarah and I recently did a whole video on that, but even if I thought that those were unwatchable, it's not like it would make me suddenly not like Star Trek anymore, or like what I saw as Star Trek isn't Star Trek anymore, We live in a day and age where it is so much easier than it ever has been to go back to your favorite things, to get them, to get a hold of them, to own them, to watch them, and so to read them, and so I feel like stuff has such a more staying power than it ever has before because it's still around, and a lot of things keep getting repackaged and re-put out, and things stay relevant far longer than they ever used to now, and so that's wonderful. And so I said this when Man of Steel came out and we reviewed it. Man of Steel is not the be-all end-all of Superman just because it's the big-budget version right now. You know what I mean? And if you didn't like the Nolan films, neither was that, because you've still got the things that came before it, right?
And there are people that don't.
And there are people that don't, yeah, and that's why I say that. But, okay, so Man of Steel, that comes out, and when I was watching it, one of the big things that I kept thinking was, this movie is not meant to introduce anyone to Superman.
Yeah, that's fair.
It is an alternate version. It expects that you've already seen Superman before. That it's almost I don't want to say it's discrediting itself at all, but like it's almost saying, trust us, folks. This is an experiment. We're going to see if we can get it right, but just understand that we're not making the be-all end-all of Superman, because the way a lot of those beats work is like, look, Lois Lane and Clark Kent are meeting before they ever did before, and without glasses and stuff. Like it's playing it like isn't it kind of neat and clever how different this is from before? It's expecting that you know the old versions of those things, the ones that permeate and stayed in our conscious for years and years and years.
Because if you expect the love interest in Lois Lane, then it's not stilted when you see it in the movie. If you're expecting it, well, it is. But that doesn't mean that... it means that you accept it a little bit more because you're like, well, obviously they'll get together.
And I could understand if people don't like that, but I'm just saying that I would feel very weird about handing anyone that had never seen anything Superman ever before Man of Steel.
Yeah. I'd watch the Donner movie first.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or the Fleischer cartoons, or the animated series.
It really plays like an alternate history to me.
I think that as a
I've heard a lot of people call it Ultimate Superman. It feels like that.
That's great. Oh, or All-Star Superman. Wait, that's taken. But
and different.
and really good. Oh. Well, have we plumbed the depths of this topic?
I think we have. This is one of those things I don't think you can ever completely and utterly answer. But
I guess if I have to come down on it,
yeah, sure.
The thing I said earlier is that sure, it can be a liability, as you said, commercially marketing. It can be a liability, but so can being too faithful to the material. Depending on the day and age you're in, people might not be interested. Even if people go, yep, that's exactly what it should be. Maybe like 15 people go see it, because they're just not interested anymore. I'm not saying that it's not an interesting character by any means. I'm just saying that people might not be interested in whatever said icon is, Superman or not.
Or whatever it is, yeah. My final thought is, and I'm not talking Man of Steel now, I'm just talking about whatever the thing is. If something comes out and you feel like it totally ruined one of your favorite things, and it did that on a cultural society level because everybody went and saw it, and so that's the current version, yeah, that sucks. But you know what, for you it's supposed to be. And I think that's okay, I think we can all love what we love, and I think that different versions of things can be seen as their own properties. So no, I didn't love the new Lone Ranger, but it didn't make the old stuff suddenly terrible. You know what I mean? In fact, it made me want to go back and rewatch that stuff. And the new Star Trek made people go back and watch the old Star Trek and made it popular again. So now Lone Ranger's not going to do that because nobody went and saw that movie. But you see what I'm saying? So yeah,
but maybe people will be interested in going back and watching the prequels to the Lone Ranger. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean Pirates of the Caribbean.
Vince, let's go ahead and go on to rants. Today, you came up with such a great rant that I would like to do a collective rant.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Sure.
And spend maybe a few minutes on this one. Go ahead, Vince.
We're having few-minute rants.
Yeah, and then we'll discuss it. Go ahead.
All right. So my brother the other day said, "Vince, have you heard about this?" And I said, "No, what is it?" He said, "This is ridiculous."
And Vince said, "Calm down, Chicken Little."
The sky is falling. And so my brother comes over to me the other day. He says, "Vince, this something terrible has happened in the English language." And I'm saying, "Oh my God, what are you talking about?" And I'm paraphrasing, but it was a fun conversation. He says,
"Cookies now mean milkshake."
He says they have added a new definition.
You go to Steak and Shake, you're like, "Can I have a cookie?" They bring you a milkshake. You're like, "I didn't want to..."
Can I have a milkshake? They bring you a cow that's drunk. So,
anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So they have added a new definition to the word literally. Literally can now mean literally in actuality, and literally can also now mean figuratively. And I would like to say that that's freaking stupid. Those two words are antonyms.
Yeah.
They mean opposing things.
Right.
So when you say that this can mean this, it's the same thing as saying that up can mean down, left can mean right, and that's a problem. Now, I'm not saying that the whole of the English language will suffer as a result. I'm not saying it's like epic proportions.
It could be a precedent for a lot of bad things happening, but yeah.
And I'm aware that these things tend to happen, that vernacular will alter a language over time. I mean, there are words that we use now that you go back 70 years ago that we never used.
Or that meant different things back then.
Or that meant different things. I mean, there are words that are like now slurs that meant things that were, nothing at that point.
Gay will never mean happy again.
And queer just meant odd.
Right,
And so these things are words that have now the connotation has become the definition.
Our kids will grow up and see movies from the 40s or 50s and they won't understand those words because they mean something different now.
Yeah. So, and it doesn't bother me when certain things happen, like the word ain't is inducted into the English language.
No.
I don't care. Why? Because it's not like we were saying the word ain't as another word. I don't care. And, words tend to have definitions that are not even related to each other. One word can mean the same thing as another word, and these two words be wholly separate. But not opposite. You can't do that, because then you make the word invalid. If I ever say literally again, it means nothing, because the person will have to ask to clarify.
Yeah. Even from context, you won't be able to tell what you're saying necessarily.
Yeah. So I'll have to say in actuality or in reality, or this thing is something that super freaking exists.
Now, Vince, I would bet that money that you would expect that me hearing this, I would probably freak out and think that it is a degeneration of the human language as much as as back several years ago, I complained so hard about the abbreviation of Mountain Dew on Mountain Dew cans. But here's the thing. What bothers me about this is it being in the dictionary.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother me so much if people were to start accepting it more if they accepted it on a slang basis. Yeah. Because in the 90s, I guess I say that a lot, but you just gotta understand that's when we grew up. In the 90s, when we were in like junior high school, I was hearing constantly bad meaning good. This was a colloquialism.
Man, that's bad.
Yeah, this is something that for whatever reason, urban slang and stuff, we do this. We'll take a word that means the opposite and we will use it to mean, we'll take a word and we'll use it to mean its opposite. So the article, and I'll put a link to this in the description. The article that I read about this right before the show, Vince, pointed out that this has been a misuse for like 2 centuries. That like this is not recent. This is something that's been going on forever. People say literally when they really mean figuratively. If it was like a facetious thing, or like a deliberately ironic sort of thing, or sarcastic, actually, not ironic, but more sarcastic, where you're just like, well, literally, then I wouldn't really care about it. But yeah, what bugs me is, like, people are just using a word incorrectly, and the dictionary is throwing its hands up in the air and saying, well, I guess now this has got to be, we've got to make this grammatically correct because no one understands the word. Yeah, you're absolutely right. When you do that, you're taking the word and making it mean nothing. Because what is language for? Communication! So we can't have a word that means 2 opposite things.
Yeah. I mean, you might as well take ironic and make it mean unfortunate. Why not? I mean, at this point...
Or coincidence. Because a lot of the time, and I have definitely made this mistake myself plenty of times, where we accidentally say ironic when we really meant coincidentally. And so if people do that enough, are we going to do that too? Are we going to make that a new definition in the dictionary?
It just bothers me.
No, it bothers me too.
I think it's foolish. I think it's a bunch of people saying, well, let's just cave into something because nobody uses it right. Well, that doesn't mean anything. There's no reason to change a definition just because people don't use it properly. I mean, I have in the past used the word man to distinguish person. So I've said to a woman, like, hey man, that's cool. Whatever. Yeah. I said that to someone today.
You weren't really... I've said that to my wife. Yeah, you're not really calling her man. You're just using the word. Yeah, it's a filler word.
It's just... Excuse me. It's just a word that means person. And that's fine. People have said mankind, which is not gender specific. Right. It's just mankind. So...
Yeah. Or the world of men. That just means people.
Yeah. If you can support it, a reason to do it, other than the fact that everyone uses it wrong... It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, but like I said, if it's just a silly colloquial thing, if we actually used it sarcastically, it wouldn't bother me. But yeah, putting it into the dictionary means people just don't know it, right? And so you might as well just not even do that. You might as well just say, well, say anything you want to, and hopefully people will get what you're saying.
And another thing that bothers me about saying literally means figuratively is that when people tend to use it, they don't necessarily mean figuratively. They mean, like, seriously. This is a big deal. This is literally awful.
You're absolutely right.
And I'm not saying that is figuratively awful, because it's not truly awful. It's just awful in concept. This is literally awful, meaning that this is seriously awful, that you cannot doubt the fact that this is credibly awful. So maybe they should have made literally mean credibly awful.
I think you're absolutely
credibly.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I think you're onto something. I think people actually mean that more often than they mean figuratively when they say
contact
the
Webster.
Word literally. Yeah. Well, I don't want to undermine the language further.
If you're gonna cave, at least cave into the right one.
Well, anyway, that's our rant, and Vince and I will go on trying as hard as we can to use the word literally correctly, no matter what Webster says.
I think I might just stop using the word literally, and every time I say literally, I'll be like, F you, Webster!
Well, the thing in that article that I read also said that perhaps it's, and I don't buy into this, that perhaps it's okay because all the dictionary is to reflect the changes in common language, and so then it's just doing what it's always done. But even if that's true, well, it's reflecting dumbing down of the language.
Yeah, I tell you what. How about instead of making literally mean figuratively and literally, or in actuality, how about we just make literally mean figuratively,
and then come up with a different word?
Yeah.
But you would have the same problem.
I will let people say, well, I mean, not necessarily, but there's a lot of Lees in here. Hi, Lee. Yeah. That's my proposal. How about we just remove the definition that apparently no one knows?
But see, you can't do that because some of us do know it and use it correctly.
That'd be really funny. Suddenly, everybody who's been using it correctly for years.
Oh, that would drive me crazy. It would be so hard to write reviews without being able to use the word literal.
Can't we just write, like, in the dictionary, slang definition? Or, when used improperly, it means this.
Well, yeah, they should do that. But yeah, there are slang definitions in dictionaries.
I mean, so why not, instead of adding a definition, just say, look, because people don't know any better or refuse to learn or accept the reality of the situation, we're going to put this in the dictionary so that you, Grandpa Joe, can pick this up and say, well, my grandson said this to me today.
By the way, just for the record, I still don't love ain't as a word just because it's a contraction that doesn't have two words that are brought together.
Yeah, it ain't a big deal, though.
Well, it's not a big deal, but if you think about it, it is a little bit irritating.
Yeah.
It's got an apostrophe, but
that is dumb.
There are not two words that make that word. That's why it wasn't a word before.
It's kind of fun to look at words and, God, that's a geeky thing to say, and kind of look at the genesis of it and, like, slang how...
What are you going to do? We were English majors. I mean, seriously.
Like, that being a word that's dumb, but you look at that word, you can see that it evolves from all right, but ain't evolved from effectively nothing. So...
Ain't evolved from people not figuring out how to say isn't.
Yeah. And, there's no A sound in isn't. But, I don't know, I just think it's funny. It doesn't bother me, but I just don't know where it came from. Like, what language or accent does ain't evolve from? I don't know.
Well, anyway, this concludes our broadcast rant, and thanks as always for watching. If you would like to see us talk about any particular subject at all, leave your ideas in the comments below, and tell us what you think about our topic for the day. Icons and iconic characters, and
right. Click on them on your desktop.
What is and at what point do those characters stop being who they were as we're changing them to fit our current molds? Let us know what you think. Leave that in the comments, and we'll see you again next week. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Vince, reminding you to support your local dictionary. comic book store.
Actually, maybe not, because, like, you know,
yeah, don't support the local dictionary. Support the actual meaning of words.
We'll see you later. Bye.